treatment. For some people, treatment is very helpful. For other people, treatment hasn't been terribly helpful, and they're not really that interested in it. And if my job is to get you to accept the care that you've refused consistently for the last 20 years, I'm probably not going to be very successful. So the complaint I hear a lot from peer staff in the United States, or I had been hearing, was, I'm really good at developing relationships with people, and people come to trust me, and they want to know from me what I think is going to be helpful to them, and I can't in good conscience recommend the treatment that I know sucks, to be blunt. So I'll go out there and I'll connect with people and I'll develop relationships, but somebody needs to make sure that the services that they will be engaged in will not be detrimental to their mental health, but will actually promote their recovery. So this is a dilemma for peer staff. When peer staff are working well, there is an inevitable tension, at least for now. Hopefully, Geraldine and her colleagues will make sure that it doesn't continue to be like this. But for now, there's a tension between being what I guess you would call co-opted, or what's another term for that? Is there a British term for that? Co-opted? So there's a risk, there's a danger. As you get hired into existing conventional mental health services, there's a danger that peer staff will become just another extension of bad care. And there was a U.S. Article in the popular media a few months ago now that talked about how peer staff are being used because they help people stay on their meds. That was the benefit of peer staff. They follow their clients around and make sure they take their pills. And a lot of mental health administrators thought that was good. That's a good thing. We want people to take their meds, and if I can pay you to do it and you can show me that your patients are taking their medications, that's a good outcome. Well, maybe 5 years ago that would have been considered a good outcome. But now we know that medications have serious side effects, can have lifelong health consequences, don't work for a lot of people, didn't work as well as that we were told they worked, and so we're rethinking the whole medication issue. At least in the US, we're rethinking. And the director of the NIMH just came out a couple months ago and said there have been now 2 longitudinal studies that have shown that taking medication on a maintenance basis, in terms of long-term antipsychotic use over the long term, impedes recovery.
Does it include lithium?
No, this was antipsychotics. Good question. The question was, does it include lithium? The answer is no. It was only looking at antipsychotic medication. But I hope that peer staff here, well, I know because they're being trained by the IMROC people, I know they're not being trained to make sure people take their medications. But what are they being trained to do? And I hope that in part what they're being trained to do is advocating for the system itself to change in order to be more responsive to the needs of the people it serves. So that study I showed you a few slides back, the function of the peers here in the third condition was to facilitate person-centered care planning and to be an advocate for the person in their team meetings. That's just one of many roles that peer staff are able to play. But I'm very glad to hear that you've hired hundreds of peer staff. To me, it makes me think that we are at somewhat of a crossroads, you are somewhat of a crossroads, in determining how transformative these peer staff will be. When we first started hiring peer staff back in the early 90s, one of the main agenda we had was to change the mental health system. Now, it's not fair to put that agenda on the shoulders of any individual peer, because only one person can only change so much. But having a workforce that becomes pervaded by people in recovery at all levels, not just at the entry-level outreach worker level, but at all levels, including eventually commissioners and clinical administrators, et cetera, will change the culture of the mental health system to be more responsive to the needs of the people it serves. So how does that fit into where we are now? We are moving away from symptom management and accepting long-term disability. We are moving toward promoting recovery, social inclusion, and citizenship of persons with mental health conditions and addictions through the use of community-based supports, including peer-delivered supports, and shifting to self-management of healthcare conditions, including behavioral health care. And who better to promote that than people in recovery who have experienced it themselves? This third bullet, shifting to self-management, people know about self-management in diabetes, and they know about self-management in cardiac disease, and they know about self-management in other chronic physical conditions. But in a way, we're now, in terms of self-management, where we were in the early 90s with peer support. Because if you tell many mental health practitioners that we want to help people manage their own psychiatric condition, they will think we're talking nonsense. As a matter of fact, we are in the process of producing an IMROC-like practice guidance, for psychiatrists on how to prescribe medications in a person-centered fashion. And to do that, we've highlighted this notion of self-management. Because after all, I'm the one who lives with my mental illness in between appointments, right? And I have to know what to do in between appointments. And one of the first psychiatrists I had read this to give me feedback said, I don't know about this self-management stuff. I became a doctor so I could care for my patients. I don't think I want them caring for themselves. I don't know that they're really capable of caring for themselves. I think they need doctors to really take care of them. So we are, again, facing what I hope will be somewhat of a revolutionary concept, that people with serious mental illnesses can, and in the future will, take care of themselves. Doesn't mean doctors are not important, but life in between appointments is more important. Traditionally, we treated the illness with the hope that it would go away, even though usually it was the person we sent away, not the illness. Now we're focusing on preparing and equipping people to take care of their illnesses and themselves while remaining in the community. So what do people need? What time is it now? How am I doing? Good. Okay, so this is the bulk of what I wanted to talk about. I got here in time. Okay. So what do people need in order to self-care, in order to self-manage a mental health condition? And we have voluminous research in many health conditions that show that there are 4 key ingredients to productive, effective self-management. This is not just for the peers in the room, this is for everybody. People need available and consistent social support. And when I say social support, that's really a fancy psychological term for it. What it really means is people need to be loved and to love others. It doesn't mean they need to have a friendly mental health worker, even though it's important to be friendly if you're a mental health worker. But that only goes so far. And let me pause for a minute, because this is an example of all 4 of these things I'm going to talk about. So social support's a nice sort of sterile term. I used to start talks, when I would give talks on social support, I would start with a slide that shows my wife and my 3 daughters on it, and I would say, that's not really social support. Or that is social support, and when we talk about social support, that's what we mean. So imagine my wife and my 3 daughters on that slide. They're all lovely, charming people. I don't think social support quite captures how important they are to me. People with serious mental illnesses need people in their lives who are as important to them as my wife and my children are to me. And we cannot play that role because we're paid to care for them. And they know that. As friendly as we are, they know at the end of the day we get paid and we go home to our own families. And they often don't. So if someone needs to be loved and to feel capable of loving others in order to take care of themselves, what can we do about that? we're not going to talk a lot about that today because we don't have time, the answer to that question, which is a lot of fun to talk about. But the point for today's talk is more that peer support understand this in a way that's different from people who have not experienced it themselves. They know how important it is to feel like you're a worthwhile, lovable person because they lost that at some point and had to regain it. If you've never lost that, if you've been privileged and fortunate like I have a mental illness, but I never lost that sense of being a worthwhile, lovable person. I can't imagine. I can try. I've tried for years, but I can't fully appreciate just how devastating that is. What I do know, and what I've heard from many people, is how could I possibly take care of myself? I'm just surviving on a day-to-day basis. I'm just doing what I can to stay alive. How do you expect me to do A, B, C, D? We did a study of recidivist patients, people who kept coming back to an acute inpatient unit and who didn't seem to be able to establish a foundation for recovery in the community. And we asked them, what can we do to help you stay out of the hospital? And they thought we'd been taking drugs or something. That question made no sense to them. First of all, it made no sense because they said, isn't that what the hospital's for? When you get sick, aren't you supposed to go to the hospital? Why would you try to keep me out of the hospital? So that was the first question. Second question is, what do you mean, what can I do? Because we also asked them, what can you do to stay out of the hospital? And they didn't understand that question either. What can I do? I can't do anything. I have no control over things in my life. I can't do anything. That I can't do anything is what we talk about as having a sense of efficacy. To have a sense of efficacy, to have a sense that what you do matters, you first have to have a sense that you matter. And you don't matter if when you died, nobody cared. We did a study a long time ago of ACT teams. You've had experience with ACT teams, right? So we interviewed people who were receiving ACT service. ACT is an intensive case management program. And we interviewed people who received ACT services. And one woman said, the biggest difference in being on an ACT team from before when I wasn't on an ACT team is now I know that if I died in my sleep, somebody would find out before my body started to rot. Because they'd come by and they'd knock on my door, and if I didn't answer after 2 or 3 days, they would get the cops and they'd come in and see what happened to me. Before I was on the ACT team, nobody would have noticed until my body started to smell. Now, I don't know about you, but I've never felt like that. I've never felt like if I died, nobody would care, nobody would notice. Many peer staff will have had that experience themselves, and they will be sensitized to that. And they will know, how do you go about helping someone to feel lovable? Because they've gone through that process themselves. Let me just give you an example. I'll come back to these other slides in a minute. But this sense of social support or being loved and accepted, some people get this from family. And if their family can preserve that sense over time, that's really a wonderful thing. Like this woman says, when I was going through my psychotic changes, my grandmother, she's talking about her grandmother, was always there for me. She never turned her back on me. So some people never lose this sense of being loved and valued, and that's fabulous, and that provides a solid foundation for self-care. But for people who don't have that, the people I'm most concerned about are the people who've lost that. Peer staff have ways of finding sources of support, not just themselves. The caring that they provide is very important. But that caring then leads them to want to expand the network of care around this person. And that can come from lots of places, like this third one. So somebody said they liked horses. So you say, okay, so they like horses. But then somebody said, well, maybe they should actually go ride a horse. So we did that. This person went and rode a horse. And he said, and he knew he was going to ride a horse. He would talk to this person that he was going to ride in a van. They're going to have to go 45 minutes outside of town to a stable. He was going to go there. He was going to learn how to ride a horse. But he said it wasn't until he got there and stepped out of the van into manure and smelled hay that he realized there were going to be real horses there. And then it wasn't until the trainer, the horse riding instructor, said, "Sam, why don't you get up on the horse?" that he realized that he, Sam, was going to get on a horse. Now you think, well, he's got a thought disorder, or well, he's psychotic, or well, he has schizophrenia. Well, turns out that Sam thought that because this horseback riding program was through a social club, that he was going to watch other people ride horses, or that he was going to talk about horse riding. But since he'd never really done anything through that social club that was real, he didn't expect this to be real either. It's what I call the slipcover mental health, the slipcover approach in mental health. We can talk about it, we can do all these things, but you don't really do it. You don't really get on that horse. So he did, and he said, "I think riding the horse helped me. It relaxed me, and I guess it made me feel like the horse loved me. Spending time with the horse, it felt like unconditional love. You connect with the animal and with yourself, and you're outdoors, and it does something to you. It's hard to explain, but when you go home, you think, wow, another lesson. Wow, I'm getting better." A lot of people get this sense of love from their pets, dogs, cats, horses. And again, peer staff are quicker maybe than a lot of the rest of us who are trained clinically to realize, oh, maybe if you had a cat to come home to, you wouldn't be so lonely. Rather than thinking, health codes, can't take care of herself, how could she take care of a cat? What's going to happen when she goes to the hospital? All the things that some of us as mental health providers start thinking about, all of the buts. But this, but that. Peer staff are more likely to say, she can take care of a cat. That would give her a reason to take care of herself if she had a cat, because then the cat would rely on her, and she'd have to be healthy so she could take care of a cat. If she goes to the hospital, we'll figure it out. People who have cats go to hospitals. We figure it out. I'll talk to the landlord. If the landlord needs assurance that she's going to empty the litter box, we'll make sure she empties that litter box. I'll talk to the landlord. Let's do it. It's much more of a let's do it. Geraldine said that before. This is a let's do it. It's much more of a we'll figure it out. Life is not always done ahead of time. We'll figure it out. I ran into this with an example of a client whose goal was to open a checking account. This was in a residential program I was consulting to, and for months they were saying their clients had no goals. So first we helped them to realize everybody has goals, you just have to help them to articulate those. First they have to trust you, and then you have to help them articulate what would make my life better. Nobody has goals, but everybody has ideas about what may make their life better. So one guy finally, after about 6 months of prodding and joining with, said he wanted to open a checking account. So the staff's first response was, okay, we'll start a group on how to open a checking account. And we'll invite everybody who's in the house, this was a residential program, to come to the group on how to open a checking account, and then we can bill Medicaid, because groups are Medicaid billable, so it'll be a billable hour. So we'll do what we're paid for, and we'll address his goal. And then he didn't come to the damn group. And they go, so why didn't he come to the group? Because he didn't want to go to a group, he wanted to open a checking account. Peer staff are much more likely to say, let's get in the car and let's go to the bank. Now you think, but he's not learning skills. Where do you learn the skills of opening a bank account? At the bank. Peer staff takes Joe, they go to the bank, they get there, he doesn't have the required identification. Joe is disappointed and frustrated. Peer staff says, I don't know, I haven't opened a banking account in 20 years. How do I know what you need? Let's find out what you need. We'll come back when we've got it. So they go, they leave. He realizes not everybody knows everything anyway. Life's not like that. They come back later. The supervisor's pissed because you shouldn't have taken Joe to the bank if he didn't have the required paperwork. So, well, I didn't know what paperwork he needed. Well, you should have found out before you went. Why? When was the last time you opened a banking account? I bet you the first time you went to the bank to open a banking account, you probably didn't have all the paperwork either. And maybe learning how to deal with frustration of how bureaucracies can be in the real world is more important than learning the ABCs of bank account opening. Social support. So, just another example of social support. So if a person hears voices and some of those voices are distressing, but some of those voices are very important and keep the person company, peer staff are more likely to say, well, their voices are not all the same. Some voices can be helpful, some voices can be destructive. How do we figure out what you're going to do with these different voices? Understanding that if you just say, let's get rid of all the voices, that includes those voices that may be giving them some sense of self-worth. And tragically, when clozapine was introduced into the United States back in the 90s, there were a large number of suicides. And people were really wondering, why did all these people who were getting better kill themselves? And one of the main reasons was because we had taken away those voices that had for many years been their only social support. Social support comes in many forms. It can be delusional, it can be hallucinated, it can be flesh and blood, but people need a sense of being loved if they're going to take care of themselves. So enough about that. People need accurate and accessible information, which we've never really given them. Part of the reason we haven't given them accurate and accessible information is because we don't have it. We don't know really what's involved in self-management for psychosis, for example. We know what's involved in CBT for psychosis, but we don't know what's involved in living with psychosis. And who's going to teach us that? People in recovery. We have a lot to learn about how to live with a serious mental illness before we can start teaching people strategies for doing that. The voice hearing movement is one of the few sources of that kind of information. How do you live with voices? That's a very different question than how do you get rid of voices. And since we haven't done a really good job of getting rid of the voices, I think it's time we started to learn how to help people live with the voices. And we still have a lot more to learn about that. Internal locus of control. People need to have a sense that they have some control over their lives. Again, that study we did with recidivist folks, they had no sense of control. Everything happened to them. And when people with serious mental illnesses talk as if everything is happening to them, that's because that's how they experience it. They're not making it up. It's not in their heads. It's in their lives. That's what it seems like. That's what it feels like. How do you help people gain a sense of control? Like this. This is a woman with schizophrenia, diagnosed with schizophrenia. She says, I have a good will. It just takes the right amount. Oh, no, that's not the right one. I'm sorry. This is it. I'm in a contest of will with the world, with nature, and I say to myself, well, damn it, you just calm down and drink your coffee. And I say to myself, you just have to wait 5 minutes. So I wait, and then the roommate's still bugging me out. But then I have the control, the self-esteem, the confidence, and it's manageable. Then I just proudly walk to my room and take space. I mean, it's successful. Basically, if you know recovery, it's more about taking control of your life and what you're going to do. So taking control can start at this very micro level of, okay, I'm getting upset. What do I need to do? I need to have some coffee. I need to chill out and come back to this in a few minutes. That's control. That's a small step toward gaining a larger sense of control, which ends up looking more like this. There's this wicked side of me that can stop me. Just like when I'm looking for a job and see a job that would suit me, there's a voice that says, that's no job for you, and stuff like that. And so I have to work a lot with that voice. Oh, shut up. I'm going to apply for that job anyway. It's a struggle going on inside me all the time. efficacy is what comes after control. So this is a young woman who had been a jazz pianist before she developed a psychotic disorder. She was in the hospital for many years, and she talked about one of the turning points in her recovery was when a nurse gave her a radio that she could listen to, and she found that she could turn on and off the radio herself to her own favorite station. It's being active, and I take pride, and I'm independent to a certain extent, like in my jazz music. Like, I'll turn on my jazz radio, and I'll love it. It's my interest. I turn the radio on myself. No one had it going to nourish themselves, to entertain themselves like parents would at a house. I turn it on. I'm responsible. I enjoy the music. I make notes and draw while I'm hearing it. Then I turn it off. Then I have some evidence. I've got something done. I've been productive. I have the drawings to look at. It was for me and by me, my own nurturing. So I'm proud of this effort. I think there's another. This was another person talking about very similarly. Before, everything was in the long term. Instead, having to hang on to find strength, I live small moments more intensely. Now we're here, you and I, and my whole life is all here, only here. It doesn't matter what else happens. This moment here is more important than anything that might happen tomorrow. This was definitely decisive for me, this act of living intensely what I'm doing instead of worrying about the future or other things was a real support, a cornerstone for everything. A very difficult awareness, a difficult position to take, but living intensely whatever I'm doing, being very concentrated, for me personally, I did this and no one told me to do it. I did it on my own and it works for me. People need what we call micro actions. Yes, micro decisions and micro actions. And these are things that most of us take for granted, like the decision to get out of bed in the morning. That is a decision. Some mornings it's easier than others. Some people have no reason to get out of bed in the morning, and they need to find a reason to get out of bed in the morning, and that reason could be to turn on and off a radio to a jazz station that you like to listen to. And again, these are things, because they have lost that taken for granted quality, that peer staff can be very attentive to. Another example of this, we have a homeless outreach team, and it gets very cold in Connecticut in the winters, not usually as cold as it is this year, but it usually gets cold enough that we worry about people dying on the streets. And there was one woman in particular that our homeless outreach team was very concerned about, who had refused consistently for years to get housing. She'd been offered apartments and she had turned it down. So finally, it was November, it's getting into the winter, the staff were very worried. They told her if she did not accept an apartment that they had found for her, they were going to have to put her in the hospital because they were afraid she was going to die from exposure. It was getting too cold out and she was not going to survive. And she would be considered gravely disabled. So finally, they persuaded her to try an apartment, and they helped her move into this apartment. And they were very disappointed the next morning when they found her back under the bridge. And they said, Sarah, what happened? We got you this really nice apartment. We helped you move in. What are you doing back here? She said, it was like an oven. You want me to sleep in an oven? You put me in an oven. What are you talking about, an oven? Let's go back. Show us what happened. So they go back to the apartment, and it's about 85 degrees in the apartment. It had been unoccupied for a while. The landlord, being very thoughtful, had turned the thermostat up to get it warm for her for when she moved in. She had moved in. The staff had helped her move in. Nobody noticed, I guess, that it was a little bit warm in the apartment at the time. But when they left, she tried to sleep, and it was too hot, so she got up and left. What had they missed? The thermostat. She didn't know what a thermostat was. She'd never had a thermostat before. I dare to venture to guess that had there been a peer outreach worker there, they might have thought, not necessarily, but they might have had the foresight to think, Sarah, do you know what this is? This is a thermostat. This will help you to regulate how hot or how cold it is in this apartment. So if it gets too warm in here, you can turn it down. If it gets too cold, you can turn it up. Personally, I probably wouldn't have thought of that when I was doing outreach work. Now, I would think of that because peer staff have taught me things like people don't know how to use thermostats. people don't know that they can turn on and off their own heat in their apartments.
Just a couple of minutes, Larry.
Yeah. Those are the kind of things that we take for granted, and we miss opportunities to help people develop their sense of efficacy and their sense of control in these small steps. So I take it step by step. I've learned to hurry slowly. To me, that captures the process of recovery very well. People hurry slowly. They hurry because they're miserable, they're desperate, they really want things to get better, but they have to go slowly because there's no clear path ahead. They don't know what to do. And our job is to help them envision what the next one or two steps are in that path. I've learned to hurry slowly and do it in stages and set partial goals when I've discovered that it makes sense. Doing it by partial goals and making it manageable. Then you get positive feedback that it's going okay, and then you don't hit the wall. That's my strategy, the strategy for success. Partial goals and sensible goals and attainable goals, and that's something I've learned to do in order to achieve things. When I've been able to deal with something that's been a struggle and feel secure, I move on, step by step, put things behind me. Just one last, I can't pass that one up. I was in Hertfordshire years ago, and folks were just getting into recovery narratives, and I saw one of them had the title, "Each time I recover enough, I borrow a dog and go for a walk." I think that's fabulous. I love dogs, and I know what it's like to take a dog for a walk. So this person had the good sense to know that he wasn't well enough to have his own dog, but he would still enjoy borrowing someone else's dog and taking it for a walk. Now, how many people, to be truthful, how many people in this room would have thought to suggest that he borrow a dog and take it for a walk? Good. That's what the art of peer work looks like. So maybe, what do you love? Oh, I love dogs. Well, you want to get a dog? No, I couldn't possibly take care of a dog. Well, do you want to take a dog for a walk? Do you want to go to the pet store and look at the dogs? No, that would be too upsetting. Well, I know Fred over there. Fred has a dog. Maybe Fred would like you to take his dog for a walk every once in a while. That's recovery. This is what recovery looks like. Borrowing dogs and taking them for walks is a perfect example of what recovery looks like in practice. And if you find that too mundane, too pedestrian, too quotidian, to use a poetic term, and that you need to be doing things that are more important than that, you're not cut out for peer work. Seriously, not everybody is. Not everybody's cut out, whether or not you're in recovery, not everybody's cut out to do this kind of work. This is hard work that takes a long time, and you see incremental changes, like now Harry's taking dogs for walks. By the way, I have a daughter at Durham University who was feeling really homesick. We have dogs, and she was feeling really homesick, and she had the good sense to join a dog walking club. So she now takes other people's dogs for walks. This has nothing to do with mental illness. Nothing that I'm talking about today really has to do specifically with mental illness. This is true of all of us. Although my daughter does have mental illness too. But even if she didn't have a mental illness, taking dogs for walks is part of life. Okay. This is well captured by Billie Holiday, the jazz vocalist who died from a heroin overdose. She was talking about addiction treatment, but it's equally true of mental health treatment. You need a little love in your life and some food in your stomach before you can hold still for some damn fool's lecture about how to behave. Peer staff are going to make sure the person has love in their life and food in their stomach so that they can listen. We're not damn fools, but so they can listen to what we can teach them about taking care of themselves. But if they're hungry and lonely, they're not going to be listening. And they're not going to think that they can do anything that we're trying to tell them that they can do, and it's going to be wasted effort. So make sure they have love in their life and food in their stomach before you start teaching them about their medications. All right, those are implications. That's what peers do. They're strength-based. They convey the message to people, you can do recovery, I did it, you can do it, I can help you, we can help you. Like I said, these slides will be available. So then, once that's in place, I'm not going to get to integrating peer staff. Maybe if you have questions about that, maybe we can take it up in the discussion or during the break. But I'm going to end with this. So once the person has a foundation of social support, efficacy, and control, then you invite the person to take up an active role in their own care. And I put the word invite in quotes because it really has to be an invitation. It can't be a mandate. It can't be a thou shalt. It has to be a, wouldn't you like to have better control over your, whatever you want to call it. They have to be interested. They have to feel like they have what it takes, and they have to be interested, which means that other things can't be more pressing, like being hungry or being unloved and all that stuff. So you invite them to take an active role. You explore with them what their understanding of the situation is, because they often don't see it the same way that we do, and that's a whole nother topic. But telling some